You're listening to the Animation Portfolio Workshop podcast series. In this segment, Gerard Sternik speaks with Jim Zubkavich, the program coordinator for Seneca's Animation Arts Center at York University in Toronto. Part 2.
Let me fast forward a bit, Jim. Let's be a fly on the wall when you're choosing portfolios to get into Seneca.
Okay.
Well, if you could think back to pre-animation school.
Sure.
And think back to that whole struggle you went through to put your portfolio together, which clearly you recall vividly.
Absolutely.
Okay, as being, because it's a very interesting thing, a person who's took a bunch of shots at an animation school and finally got in, and now a person who's literally overseeing who does get in and who doesn't get in.
One of the things that I feel very good about is that we try and communicate that very clearly to our applicants.
Right.
When we do our portfolio hand-in, we have them all in one of the auditorium rooms, and I'll do a presentation. And they don't just, a lot of these schools I found, they talk about how great they are, and sure, that's a big part of it, and you've got to explain why your school's great and what you bring to the table.
Right.
But I want to make sure that I address them and I say, look, this is what we're looking for from you and this is why. So that even if you don't get in, you have a sense of purpose or an understanding of what you can improve on.
Right.
The reality is that, Seneca gets a ton of applications, like just a monstrous amount for the number of seats that we offer.
Like hundreds and hundreds.
Hundreds and hundreds. So in September, we have 44 seats. So we'll have 2 classes of 22.
Right.
And we'll get, it varies obviously, but hundreds and hundreds of applications.
Yeah.
And so it's not a good ratio in terms of the number of people, that get in versus the number of applicants that we have. But
right.
The reality is that more than half of those don't have a prayer because they didn't even follow the basic instructions that we laid out.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, they're not. They don't do their diligence. They don't look into what's actually required. They don't hand in the proper materials.
Yeah.
They don't follow the basic instructions. And so right from the get-go, those ones are relatively easy to knock out.
And they're blatantly evident to you.
Well, when we ask for figure drawing and you don't have any figure drawing, then...
Yeah, that would do it.
That would do it, right? Or we ask for perspective drawings and you include something completely different, or, those are the types of things that are really quite simple. You take a quick look through and you know that the requirements aren't there. They haven't followed the instructions. They're disqualified on that front.
So that gets rid of about half of them.
It really does.
Yeah.
Or they didn't hand in a portfolio at all, at which point it's simplicity itself, right?
So, wow.
But then within that other half, that's when it starts to get, more difficult. And so the main requirements of what we're looking for, and what almost any art school, technical art school or these types of programs will ask for, they're looking for figure drawing, they're looking for perspective drawing, and all the theories that wrap into those things, right?
Right.
So we're looking for drawings that show a solid sense of volume, that show an understanding of perspective as a theory, and being able to put that into your drawings consistently.
Right.
We're looking for a sense of gesture and proportion. We're looking for, a sense of form, that these things are all visible,
Yes. So basically classical
art
principles
training.
of observational drawing.
That blows people's minds. I'll talk to applicants, or in many cases their parents, and they're saying, well, my son or daughter is a whiz on the computer, or they're really good at this stuff, or they know Photoshop, or all those types of things.
Yeah.
And that's nice, and that's something, useful as a tool, but the reality is that the software is getting easier and easier to use. It's getting more interface friendly, or it's getting, more built around artists. It's not like it was even, when I was going to school, or just before that, where computer animation was highly, highly technical, and they were teaching these programmers how to be artists.
Yes.
Nowadays, it's totally the opposite. So you've got, artists who are learning how to use the current interface for software.
Yeah, yeah.
And what the industry really wants is great designers, great artists, great storytellers, great creative thinkers that they can then teach their own proprietary software to.
You see, Jim, this is not no small point that you're making here, because I'll tell you, just briefly to interject, and then I'll disappear and let you continue talking, but one thing that we find somewhat disconcerting is many people, I just had a guy recently contact me who is using the software in a job.
Sure.
But has very little drawing background.
Right.
Okay, so he says to me, I'm interested in doing your workshop. Here's what I do. And he lists all this animation software. And I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. So you want to get into an animation school? Yeah. And what do you want to do? I'm thinking like a program like Seneca, the 3-year thing or 2-year and this and that. I'm like, great. So what's going to be in your portfolio? Well, I've got this computer stuff. And I say to them, well, that's great. But the thing is, can you draw? Well, one of the interesting things, Jim, that they'll say is, I'm doing all this on the computer now. So what do I need that for? And I say to them, honestly, look, here's how it works. The portfolio you do with us is almost like a microcosm of a portfolio you do to get a job if you added a demo reel to it.
Right.
In other words, some animation studio is going to look, can the guy draw? Can he design? Does he understand art principles? Okay? And then they'll look at an animation reel, and based on that, they'll make a decision. I said, just think that the portfolio you submit to Seneca it's the same thing as what would happen to you when you graduated, only at a higher level.
Right.
A lot of times people don't believe me.
Well, I think the thing is that there are people who have gotten a job just based on the technical skills.
Right.
But consistently, if you want to look at the ratio of those people versus the ratio of people who are now getting jobs. I mean, there are people who are sort of grandfathered into it. They got into it at a point when you didn't need those artistic skills as much, and they've been able to work themselves up into higher positions in companies or whatnot.
Right.
But you talk about entry-level positions or starting off with these companies, now this is what they're looking for. They're looking for art first and foremost, because the reality is the software is going to change. The software keeps changing.
Yeah.
So even if you're a whiz at a particular software and you've got the shortcuts and you can make something look better than, I don't want to say better than your skills, because it is your skills, but if you've got tricks on that particular software, once that tool gets taken away, you don't have your tricks anymore.
Right.
And so what are the real core fundamental understandings of storytelling, of motion and animation theory, of good design, of, all those elements that are going to be with you regardless of how the industry changes, regardless of how the software evolves?
Yeah, that's a very, I've never heard it put that quite that concisely. It's like a talisman or a touchstone. You can always go back to.
Absolutely, and they'll always be relevant.
Jim, I'm going to play this podcast the next time somebody calls me, because quite frankly, the other thing I've been telling people too is think of it in terms of a job ceiling. Because I know you guys, when you train, I'm not an animator. I'm a classically trained artist. I taught drawing and anatomy, but not animation. The general feeling I got from people was that a lot of times they were doing contract work. And oftentimes they would have to switch jobs. In other words, if they couldn't get a job animating and they could do great storyboards, they get a job storyboarding. They couldn't get a job storyboarding, but they had a number of basic skill beds or basic skill platforms that they were able to move between easily.
Absolutely.
Which made potential employment far less stressful, when they're looking around for work, than a guy who can only operate Maya.
Right, who only has one software under their belt, and once that software evolves or once companies stop using it. I mean, there were a ton of people who were learning soft image, or they were learning, and they can adapt those 3D skills, but it's a harder fight for them because they've got to learn a new interface, and they've got to take those skills and adapt them to a new piece of software.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got the core skills underneath it all, it's a much easier turn. So one of the things we do, and one of the things I feel very strongly about that Seneca does well, is we have a 3-year program, and the first 2 years are not software heavy. They're art, design, and storytelling heavy.
Right.
So we teach you basics in terms of Photoshop. We teach you how to use some Flash and things like that. But the majority of your courses are drawing-based. The majority of your courses are built around those core theories of good film theory, good storytelling, good design, perspective drawing, figure drawing, really, really heavy emphasis on those things.
Right.
So that by the time you get to the 3rd year, you're getting the most current version of the software. You're putting all of those skills to bear, and then you're building a great demo reel that you can go out and get a job immediately with.
Yeah. No, it's a very, there's a lot of really wisdom there. It reminds me very much, too, of the Sheridan program that was running when we were there.
Sure, and I absolutely agree.
The same kind of principle. Now, it's funny, and we laugh at it, but I believe I was there when the Lucy machine, the Steenbeck machine, was still going.
Yep, I was actually in the last year that used the old cameras.
Yeah, and for people who don't know what that is, because it makes us sound like we're Rip Van Winkles or something, it's basically an animating machine that uses actual film that you can look at, cut, and stick back together to get stuff to operate.
I got a bit of trivia for you. Did you know that those actual cameras, from what I was told, the actual cameras that we were shooting our assignments on were donated to the school? They were the same cameras that they used to shoot the 1960s Spider-Man show and Rocket Robin Hood.
You bet they were.
What's that, Vince?
They were fantastic. They were from the Rocket Robin Hood show. I remember that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story, eh, Jim?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just, and obviously the industry's, leapt ahead in such crazy ways. It's bizarre. When I tell my students that we were shooting pans by literally rolling the little wheels frame by frame to move the pan paper across by millimeter, and they look at me like I'm insane.
The dark ages of animation. Huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Because I do recall when I was there, too, towards the end, digital was just starting.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. To see successful examples of animation portfolios drawn by our students, visit animationportfolioworkshop.com.